In the ninth hour, as shadows lengthened and the sun dimmed, the earth bore witness to a moment that would forever alter the course of history. Upon the rugged beams of the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, forsaken and wearied, surrendered his spirit into the hands of the Father. In that solemn breath, the veil of the temple, a barrier between the divine and the mortal, was torn asunder, signifying a new covenant, a doorway into God's presence. The ground trembled, the rocks split, and the heavens wept, as creation itself mourned the death of the Son of God. This was no ordinary moment. It was the culmination of love's greatest sacrifice, a beacon of hope and redemption for all humanity.
It was not the assignment I was hoping for. I get called in by my commanding officer, and I'm hoping for a chance to make rank, a promotion, a chance to show my leadership skills, maybe even my exploits as a soldier. But I go in that day and I get crucifixion detail. Crucifixion detail. I was a little bummed. I was hoping for more. I mean, to be honest with you, I've been at this 15 years. I've made the rank of a centurion. There's 100 guys under me. My dad's a military man. My dad's dad is a military man. I'm just hoping that there's more to this than crucifixion detail. Listen, the first time you do a crucifixion, it's kind of neat. It's kind of cool. I mean, listen, Rome has got this thing down to a science. We know exactly where to place the hands and the nails, how to bend the knees and put the nails in the feet, just so they can last as long as possible up there, because crucifixion's really about length, not just the death. We've played with all kinds of stuff. I've been at crucifixions where we messed with the placement of the nails just to see how the body would respond. We've hung people upside down to see what would happen there. We've lit crosses on fire. We've even taken dead animals and thrown them on the cross to see if scavengers will come and eat the people as well. I have seen it all. I don't need another one. I'm hoping for more. But it's not what we got. In my mind, as disappointed as I was, I realized that at this point, I've got to do a really good job. I want to make sure that this crucifixion goes off without a hitch. There's no hiccups. There's nothing to talk about. It's just going to be boring, status quo, uneventful. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do it really well, so that way, when I get an opportunity for the next thing, that they'll say, he can handle more responsibility. But I'm just going to tell you, it's a crazy story what I'm fixing to say. Those 3 days were anything but uneventful. I'm not really sure where to start the story. I guess I'll say when that first time I laid eyes on the man. His name is Jesus. We were going to do crucifixions on a Friday, and it would be Sunday is when I would see him for the first time. You see, we were stationed in Jerusalem because there was this Passover feast that the Jews would celebrate once a year, and they would come, and apparently they were enslaved in Egypt, and then they were rescued from that slavery, and so they celebrate Passover to remember it, and they all come. The population of Jerusalem swells to about 100,000 people, and so to make sure that nothing goes crazy, that everything's in order and controlled, that they bring a few extra troops in, that no rebellion, no revolt, nothing gets started. And so that's why I was there. I'm just taking my time as I go around the city and just be on patrol. And there was a Sunday afternoon that one of the guys runs over a fellow soldier and he says, "We need help on the east side of town." So I get a few guys and we go, and sure enough, I get to the east side of town, and there is a massive group of people. You can feel it, like there's excitement and tension and all kinds of stuff that's building with this group of people. I looked at one of the guys, the Jewish guy, and said, "What are y'all getting all wound up about? What's the deal?" And he said, "Jesus is coming into town." At that point, I remember I'd heard about Jesus. I mean, who hadn't heard about Jesus? I mean, I had heard that he had supposedly raised somebody from the dead. I had heard that he had healed the blind folks. I had heard that he had fed thousands of people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. I really didn't think a lot about it. People just tend to believe what you want to believe. Seemed like a lot of hype. But there was this one story. There was a fellow Centurion of mine who was telling me that he had a servant in his house, and the servant in his house was paralyzed. And he went to Jesus and asked Jesus if he would heal him. And the centurion said his servant was healed. And at that point, I thought maybe I should pause on this. It made me pause just for a second, but to be honest with you, that's all it was. I just thought this is just another guy with a big crowd. So as the crowd was growing, they were making this pathway. They were taking off their cloaks and putting them on the ground, and they were waving these branches, and they were saying, Hosanna, Hosanna. And I'm like, what in the world is that? So I asked another one of these Jewish guys, I'm like, what does Hosanna mean? And he says, it means save us now. Save us now? Save us from what? Save us from who? Save us from Rome? Save us from me? Well, what are we needing to be saved from? We're taking good care of you. I know you want to have your own spot, but listen, Rome's taking care of you. You got good roads and you got peace. You got security. What do you need to be saved from? At that point, I'm thinking, man, what's going to happen here? The crowd gets louder and louder. I make some eye contact with some of the soldiers thinking, man, we might be ready to go here if they're talking about saving. I slip my hand down over the sword just in case. And as it just builds and builds and builds, I look up over the rise, and here comes Jesus. Now listen, you're not going to believe this. He comes up over the rise, and he's riding a donkey. A donkey. That's how you come into town? On a donkey? And not only that, as he gets closer, he's got tears in his eyes. He's been crying. I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, you guys are going nuts for that? That guy wouldn't last one night in the barracks with my men. I mean, you talk about anticlimactic. I just wanted to pull Jesus aside and say, hey, buddy, let me give you some lessons on how to be a savior. This is how you do it. Go get you a big white horse. Get you a big old sword. Get you a tattoo on your legs that says King of Kings. Then come riding into town. That's how you do it. Not a donkey crying. They get all wound up. Man, Jesus was polarizing. I mean polarizing. People loved him, but there were people that hated him. The religious officials, Pharisees, Sadducees, chief priests, they didn't agree on a whole lot, but this is what I did find out they agree on. They agreed on hating Jesus. They agreed on that. As Jesus was polarizing and the tension in the city continued to escalate, Jesus didn't help anything out. First rattle out of the box, when he gets to Jerusalem, he goes to the temple and he starts throwing over tables and running people out of the temple. And I just want to look at him and say, hey, man, that's not how you win friends and influence people, man. That's not what you do. Don't do that. He's just constant. It just seemed like there was constantly this tension around Jesus. But here was my thought. My thought was this. Just give this a few days. Let this feast end. When Passover's over, everybody's going to go home. These 100,000 people are going to go back to their city. Jesus is headed back to Galilee, and we will be fine. We just need to weather the storm. The tensions continued to grow, and I really didn't interact with Jesus much more that week. Let me fast forward. That was Sunday when he came into town. Thursday is when I got the call. The call was that you were going to crucify 3 people. 2 of them were robbers. 1 of them was a notorious murderer named Barabbas. And I thought, okay, we can handle this. I get my best guys together. I find the guys that have done this before, who knew how to put a crucifixion together. This isn't going to be new to them. They're not going to be wowed by it. We got everything squared away. I did say, hey, we got a big one here. All eyes are going to be on Barabbas. Are we ready? Guys seemed to be good to go. It was early afternoon or late afternoon, early evening on Thursday. I said, hey, let's just enjoy a night on the town. Friday's going to be a really, really long day because most of the time crucifixion takes a while. So we go out and have a little fun. We tried to tidy it up pretty early, but it was midnight. It's 12:30 early Friday morning. We get back to our beds and I get everything off. I'm going to lay down, try to get some sleep before a long day of putting people on a cross. And I mean, I hadn't even got my eyes closed yet. And here comes an officer running through saying, I need you. Get your stuff, get your sword, get some torches, get some chains. We got to move. I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, I see 100 men. I'm overseeing 100 men. He wants all 100. And turns out they were bringing a cohort together, which is hundreds of men. I thought there was a skirmish. I thought there was a rebellion. I thought we needed to go out there. I'm like, what's up? Where are we headed? And they said, we got to go arrest a guy. Arrest a guy? You need that many Roman soldiers to arrest somebody? Who wants the arrest? Well, the Jewish high priest. This is their time. We want to keep everything peaceful. We're going to go do it. I said, who are we arresting? They said, we're going to get Jesus. Jesus? The guy crying on a donkey? Not him. What? He's harmless. He's harmless. I'm a good soldier. I get all my stuff on. We get out there. Now listen, this story's fixing to get crazy, and you're going to think I'm crazy. We get out there in the middle of the night. It's 12:30 in the morning. I mean, we look like we are fixing to go to battle. We get to this little place called the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is waiting on us. I've made some arrests before, but most of the time they hide, they run, they do whatever. I didn't do it, right? Jesus just standing there. It's like he knew we were coming. And not only that, he looks physically and emotionally spent. I mean, he looks like just a wet noodle. I mean, nothing. It looks like he has been wrestling with somebody. He's sweaty. You can tell there's a little blood on his face. Like, what in the world has he been doing? I mean, he's just standing there like no fight in him. He couldn't get himself out of a wet paper sack. Like, this is a bit overkill for all of us here to arrest this man. And then he's got his followers. He's got these guys who are with him. They all look like they've been sleeping for the last couple of hours. I mean, they got bedhead. We're here to arrest a guy who looks like he couldn't harm a fly, and the rest of these guys don't have a clue what's happening. We get there, and Jesus speaks first. He says, who are you looking for? Who have you come for? Chief priest, who we were all there because they wanted our help, Rome's help, he says, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. Now listen to me. You ready for this? You're not going to believe what I'm fixing to tell you. You're going to think I'm crazy. Jesus says this. He says, I am he. That was his response. And every one of us had to go back like a moron. Get up. I can't move out of peripheral vision. I notice no one else can move either. I'm literally thinking too much to drink last night. I finally am able to regain my faculties. I've never experienced this in my life before. I stand up. We're very tentative at this point, and we're like, let's make a move on Jesus. Let's see if we can get some chains on. Let's get out of here. As we make a move, one of his sleepy-headed followers decides to grab a sword. If you think the whole going backwards and getting on a knee was crazy, listen to this. Listen to this. He grabs his sword and he lunges at one of the chief priest's servant. He was going for a headshot. It was bad aim. He comes down and cuts the ear clean off, like ears laying on the ground. You know what a head wound is like, don't you? I mean, it's bleeding like crazy. He's screaming, blood coming off his elbow. I'm going in like it's go time. And Jesus says, stop. He tells this guy, put the sword up. No kidding. Jesus reaches down there, grabs that ear. He doesn't wipe it off. He doesn't blow it off. He just puts it right back on the man's head. You think I'm nuts, don't you? It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. A man spoke and I got driven backwards, and then I just saw a man put an ear back on. And then he just stood there for us to arrest him. All his little buddies, they took off running. They were gone. Scared to death, we were going to arrest them next. We get Jesus handed over to the chief priest. They were going to take it from there. Apparently, they were going to do some midnight trials. It seemed fishy to me. Like, why are we trying Jesus in the middle of the night? Like, this is 12:30 in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. They're questioning Jesus. Weird to me, but I'm not asking any questions. I try to go back to the barracks and grab just a night's sleep. But listen, I couldn't go to sleep. I was replaying everything in my mind, and all I could think of was, how did I end up on the ground? And how in the world did that ear get back on? What in the world are we dealing with? To be honest, I was hoping that was the last time I was going to have to interact with Jesus. I was hoping that would be the last time. Obviously, I couldn't sleep, so I woke up early, and it was like the city of Jerusalem never went to bed that night. It was early, like 6 o'clock in the morning. The people were already riled up. All the Jewish leaders had already gotten the people stirred up. This Jesus who was polarizing, they were turning the crowd against him. Apparently, in all their midnight trials, they determined that Jesus had made this claim about being a king, and they didn't like it. So they brought it to Pilate, and Pilate didn't know what to do with it. Pilate's the guy in charge, and he didn't really want to mess with Jesus because he didn't want to disrupt all the peace, so he sends him to Herod. Herod's a nutcase, and so they send from Herod back to Pilate. Again, Pilate doesn't know what to do. Pilate's just sitting there trying to figure out, what do I do with a guy who shouldn't even be arrested, in my opinion? So this is what Pilate does. There's this tradition that Rome does for Israel every year at Passover. And what we do is we try to extend an olive branch to say, hey, let's be friends. Let's be friendly with each other. And that olive branch is, once a year, we'll release a prisoner for you. And so this is Pilate thinking, I can get out of this. I can get it to where they won't be so concerned about Jesus. And this is what Pilate does. He's a pretty good politician. This is what he does. He brings Barabbas, the notorious murderer, up, and then he takes Jesus, the donkey-riding, crying guy, and says, who do you want? I mean, what's the right decision? What's the right decision? The right decision is, let this guy go, and let's give him his just punishment. He's a notorious murderer. We're not even sure if this guy's done anything wrong. But you know what the crowd does? They start screaming for Barabbas. They start screaming for Barabbas, and Pilate, I can imagine, he's like, oh my goodness, this backfired. He's just a politician at this point, and he hands Barabbas over just to let a murderer run the streets. But you could feel it. The people weren't satisfied with that. They weren't satisfied with just an arrest. They weren't satisfied with just some imprisonment. No. They wanted more. And Pilate knew they wanted more. So Pilate said, let's have him flogged. Let's beat him. And maybe that'll quench their thirst for blood. At that point, they'd released Barabbas. So I thought I was crucifying 3 people that day, but it turns out I was only going to end up crucifying 2 people because they let my big fish go. So I was like, you know what? If I could do 3, I can do 2 even better. This is going to go great for me. They decide, because now my load has been lightened, that it's going to be my job to oversee the flogging. Flogging, crucifixion, very similar. Once you've seen it once, it's old hat. I'd seen it a bunch. In case you're not sure, let me just tell you what it involves. What we do is we take a guy like Jesus who'd been arrested and needing to be flogged, and we bring him to something like this, a big column, or what we might call the stump. Basically, you hug it, and then on the other side of it, we shackle your hands and feet so that your back is just laid out, perfectly exposed. And there could be rods, there could be whips, there could be all kinds of stuff. Most of the time we pick something that's got some metal and bones and shard, and while his back is perfectly exposed, we just go to town on it. Just go to town. Now, the Jews like to count because apparently they don't want to get to the number 40. Rome doesn't count. We don't count. Listen, this is to make an example of people. This is to show how much blood, how much skin. We've seen bones exposed. When we're done with their backside, we flip them over and we do the front bowels are exposed. There's vomiting, there's seizures. They pass out and come back to. Pass out and come back to. They call it the half-death because most people don't survive it. We stop when the eyes begin to roll back in the head and we don't think they could handle anymore. Can I tell you something crazy? Jesus was taking lash after lash after lash, and he never said a word. He never said a word. I've heard people beg for their lives. I've heard people confess. I've heard people say, I'll give you some information. I've heard it all. Listen, Jesus just sat there and took it, didn't say a word. It's like he knew it needed to be done. Told you the story was crazy. After we've got him beaten within an inch of his life, he's hardly recognizable. That's when the Roman guards do their worst, right? They wrap him up in a little purple cloak. They form this little crown here to shove on his head. They're like, hey, if you're a king, let's make you a crown. And then they just mock. I mean, it is humiliation at this point. It's who hit you? Let's spit on you. You're a king. Fake bowing, sarcasm. You get it, right? I'm not going to lie to you. I chuckled a few times. They're pretty brutal. At that point, we get Jesus and we take him back to Pilate, and Pilate stands him in front of the crowd, and Pilate says this, "Behold the man. Behold the man. Is this quench your need for blood? Are you appeased now?" And you know what they said? Crucify him. Crucify him. Crucify him. And what does Pilate do? He obliges. I went from 3 crucifixions to 2 crucifixions back to 3 crucifixions. And if I thought Barabbas was high profile, Jesus is high profile. I decide to head up to the hill where these crosses will be and make sure everything's in its right spot. Meanwhile, the rest of my guys are positioning the top of the beam of the cross onto the people being crucified. You can imagine Jesus was in no shape to carry a cross. I was wondering what took so long, but it turns out Jesus had to have some help. Some guy helps him bring it up. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. It has been a long day. It's starting to get pretty long. At this point, it's pretty routine. We position the hands and the feet just like we know how. We drive nails there. We prop that cross up and drop it in the hole where all their body weight just rests on those nails for a second. You can hear the screams and the moans of pain. And for Jesus, it didn't stop. I mean, good grief, they were relentless with the mocking. Pull yourself down. You said you'd rebuild the temple. Come on, do it. Even one of the thieves were saying it. I'm like, golly, what a way to make the time pass. You're making fun of Jesus too. All of that, there's some guards gambling for the purple robe at the bottom of the cross. We hung a sign that said King of the Jews. I mean, I think we went overboard on trying to humiliate Jesus. And then there was the thief on the other side. He's telling the other guy to shut your mouth. I mean, Jesus hadn't done anything wrong. And then get this, Jesus says, today you're going to be with me in paradise. I just want to look at Jesus and say, you ain't going nowhere. This is it, my man. This is it. It's over. It's done. You're going nowhere. And not only that, if you were going somewhere, people that get crucified don't go to paradise. 3 hours, 9 to noon. The thing that he said the most that kind of made me mad, he said this. He said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do." Forgive me? What do I need to be forgiven for? I hadn't done anything wrong. I didn't just get beat. I hadn't been arrested. I'm a good soldier. I do what I'm supposed to do. I hadn't done anything wrong. What do I need to be forgiven for? Why don't you ask for your own forgiveness, Jesus? That would make sense. I was just a little miffed at that one. If you thought the ear thing was crazy, if you thought me being blown back when he spoke was crazy, I'll tell you, it's fixing to get more nuts than that. At noon, Jesus had been on the cross for 3 hours. At noon, sun is in the middle of the sky. No kidding. It goes dark. And I mean like not cloudy dark, not eclipse dark. I mean dark. It's like someone snatched the sun out of the sky. It gets dark. It is eerie. People are scrambling off the hill. We're trying to figure out, do we continue on? Do we do something different? We need some torches. It was eerie. And it didn't stay dark for 1 minute. It didn't stay dark for 30 minutes. It stayed dark for the next 3 hours. You think I'm nuts, don't you? Crazy. 3 hours it was dark. Now, I told you I thought I'd experienced everything about a crucifixion. I have heard the gurgling of lungs full of blood and fluid and somebody trying to get a breath, but I've never had to listen to it in the dark. It was eerie. Just about the time you were getting used to the fact that it's in the middle of the day and it's dark, you could kind of tell when they're done. Jesus was there. It's about 3 o'clock, that 3 hour time frame. At the end of it, at 3 o'clock, you could kind of tell Jesus was mustering up this last breath, this final breath he was going to breathe. And as he took in that last breath, he cries out, "It is finished." I've heard some guys say some stuff from the cross when they die, but I've not heard that. He came to Jerusalem like he knew what he was doing. He was arrested like he knew what was happening. He took a beating like it was for a purpose. And then at the end, it's finished, like something was accomplished. It was strange. Not only that, but it's not like we took his life. It's like he gave it. It's like he said, "It's finished. I'm giving my life, not you're taking it from me." It was weird. Never seen that before. Now, I'm telling you, the story just gets crazier. Because soon as he says, "It is finished," soon as he says it, in the middle of the darkness, a massive earthquake hits. I mean, the ground is shaking. You can hear rocks split. The ground is crumbling. We're just sitting there trying to endure it in the dark. It felt like 10 minutes, but when it finally stopped and we got our bearings, the darkness was lifting just a little bit. And as I looked up at the cross, I could see Jesus was done. You're going to think I'm crazy, but this is what I said. I just said it. After everything I had experienced, this is what I said. I said, "Surely this is the Son of God." What would you have said? If you had seen everything I'd seen, if you had been blown back by his words, if you had seen an ear put back on, if you had seen him taking a beating and never said a word, you'd have said it too. And that's not to mention the darkness. That's not to mention the earthquake. Listen, this man is no ordinary man. This man is something special. He's the Son of God. We had to hurry up and get the bodies off the cross. Apparently a Jewish holiday. They needed all this done, so we bring Jesus down, and typically we just put him in a scrap heap. But 2 guys had gotten permission from Pilate, and they asked for permission to put the body in a tomb, and I was actually happy about that. Thought Jesus' body deserved better than just the trash heap. They put him in the tomb, they go to bury him, and those chief priests, they were obsessed with Jesus. They were obsessed. I mean, they hated him. So they go to Pilate, and this is what they say to Pilate. They say, hey, Pilate, we need a guard surrounding the tomb, and we need the tomb sealed. That's what we need. Pilate's like, why? Well, because his disciples, they might come and steal the body. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? You know where the disciples have been since we arrested Jesus? Nowhere to be found. They're hiding. They're scared to death. They're next. Ain't no disciples around. You think they're going to risk their life to go into a tomb? It's the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. Matter of fact, half of them are denying they even know Jesus. Pilate, as he'd done the whole time, he obliges, gives a guard, they seal the tomb, and those chief priests went to such great lengths to make sure no one went in. But this is what they didn't account for. They didn't account for Jesus coming out. I went home, and I had not slept on Thursday night. I didn't sleep on Friday night. I didn't sleep on Saturday night. It was Sunday morning. It had been 7 days since I first saw Jesus. And let me be clear, I don't think you would have slept either. Just be glad it wasn't you who nailed him to the cross. Just be glad you didn't beat him. Just be glad you had nothing to do with it. Be glad you didn't have anything to do with it. Because if you had something to do with it, you wouldn't have been able to sleep either. You'd have stayed up every night too, because you'd have known you were responsible. So I'm up Sunday morning, it's early, and the story gets crazy. Early in the morning, I feel the ground shake again. There's another earthquake. It's severe. This earthquake is shaking, and I'm having PTSD. I'm immediately having flashbacks of it was dark, it is finished, the ground shook, he's the Son of God. Like all of this stuff comes racing back, and I know you're going to think I'm nuts, but this is what I thought. I thought the earthquake that shook on Friday is not unrelated to the one on Sunday morning. I think they go together. I think this is Jesus again. You think I'm nuts, don't you? Word was this. Word was that Jesus had come out of the tomb and that the tomb was empty. That's the word. And I believe it. I'm just going to tell you again. If you had seen everything I had seen, you'd believe it too. Let me tell you what really tipped the scales for me. Remember all those guys that ran away when Jesus was arrested? All the guys that denied him, the guys that were hiding behind closed doors. It wasn't just a few days later. Days later, these guys start talking about Jesus. They come out of hiding and they start talking about Jesus, and they're saying these things about Jesus. They're saying Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is perfect. Jesus is the promised one. Jesus is the one we've all been waiting for because of all this sin and death and evil and lying and cheating and stealing and all of this stuff. Jesus is the one who came, and they said that Jesus didn't just come, but that he died on the cross for all of that sin and all of that pain. And as I heard it, I was like, you bet. That's why it got dark, and that's why the earth shook. And then they said this. They said, Jesus was buried, but on the third day he rose again. And they all said, we saw him with our own eyes. And this is where it gets good. It's easy to preach that until you start getting arrested. And then they started getting arrested, and they kept preaching. And then some of them started losing their lives, and they kept preaching. And some of them got crucified just like Jesus, and they kept preaching. Some crucified upside down, kept preaching. Some stoned, kept preaching. Some thrown off the temple, kept preaching. And that's when I knew You don't die for a myth. You die for truth. And I believe with all my heart, Jesus is the Son of God. He died on the cross for sin. He stayed in the grave for 3 days, and then he rose again, and he offers life to anyone who'd put their faith and trust in him. And I'm just here to tell you that story. And my question is this: do you believe it? Because if something that crazy is true, you got to do something with it. I know you're going to think I'm nuts. I believe every word. I believe every word. Do you?